Have you ever wondered why you keep ending up in the same situations with different people, different places, but the same feeling? It's not luck. It's not fate. It's your patterns, the quiet habits of your mind that repeat until you finally notice them. We don't realize it, but most of what we call personality is just behavior built from old survival. And until you learn to see it, it keeps running the show. So tonight, let's slow down and talk about why the key to real change isn't motivation. It's awareness, the kind that begins when you finally focus on your behavior and thought patterns. Part 1, the mirror you don't know you're looking into. We often think we understand ourselves because we know what we feel. But feelings are like the surface of the ocean. They move, they shift, they change. What truly defines us hides underneath, the patterns behind those feelings, the way we react when we're ignored, the kind of silence we choose when we're hurt, the excuses we make when we're scared. These are not random moments. They're patterns, quiet, invisible scripts that run in the background of our lives. You see, behavior isn't just what we do, it's what we repeat. And what we repeat often comes from something we never took time to understand. Think about it. Why do you always pull away when someone gets too close? Why do you overthink before sending a simple message? Why do you keep trying to fix people who don't even want to be fixed? These behaviors aren't accidents. They're learned, shaped by years of experiences, small emotional bruises, and unspoken lessons. Maybe you grew up thinking love had to be earned. Maybe silence meant safety. Maybe control felt like protection. And over time, those thoughts became habits. Those habits became your personality. And now you call them just the way I am. But the truth is, a lot of what we call our personality is just our history showing up again and again. People say change is hard, but most of the time, what's hard isn't the change, it's seeing yourself clearly enough to know what needs changing. This is where awareness begins, not in self-improvement, but in observation. You don't fix patterns by forcing yourself to be different. You fix them by watching them quietly, without judgment, until you start to understand why they exist in the first place. Because behind every behavior is a thought, and behind every thought is a story. Part 2, the loops we don't notice. We live most of our lives on autopilot. You wake up, check your phone, think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, repeat the same reactions. Days blend into each other, and you start to wonder why nothing really changes, why every story seems to end the same way. But maybe it's because the story never changed its script. Our behavior patterns are like invisible loops. You meet a new person, and something about them feels familiar, not because they're the same as someone from your past, but because they trigger the same old emotions. Suddenly, you're back in the same emotional pattern. Acting, reacting, defending, explaining, apologizing. You don't even realize it. You just think it's happening again. But the truth is, you brought that version of you into the new story. The part of you that still believes you're hard to love. The part of you that feels the need to prove your worth. The part that's scared of being seen, so it hides behind sarcasm or overthinking, or pretending you're fine. We all have patterns that protect us, but over time the same walls that once kept us safe start keeping us lonely. Let's say you grew up in a home where affection was rare. You learned to be strong, independent, to not rely on anyone. That behavior became your armor, and it worked. It kept you from being hurt. But years later, that same armor now stops you from letting people in. Or maybe you learned that being nice makes people stay. So you became the people pleaser, always saying yes, avoiding conflict, smiling even when you're tired. But inside you resent it. You feel unseen. Still, you can't stop, because somewhere deep down saying no feels unsafe. That's how behavior works. It's not random. It's emotional memory. And thought patterns are the language that memory speaks in. We replay the same inner dialogue that once made sense. I need to be perfect to be loved. If I show weakness, I'll be rejected. If I don't control this, I'll lose everything. But what if those thoughts aren't true anymore? What if they were only true back then, when you were just trying to survive something that doesn't exist now? The hardest part about growth isn't learning something new. It's unlearning what once saved you. And that's where awareness becomes uncomfortable, because it's not about blaming your past. It's about seeing how your past still lives in you. Part 3. The moment you notice the pattern. It always starts small. A conversation that suddenly feels too familiar. A tone of voice that makes your chest tighten. A simple delay in someone's reply that feels heavier than it should. That's how the mind works. It remembers what hurt. Not just with memory, but with emotion. You're not reacting to this moment. You're reacting to every similar moment before it. The silence that reminds you of being ignored. The tone that sounds like disappointment. The distance that feels like rejection. And just like that, you're no longer in the present. You're back inside an old story. Defending yourself from something that isn't happening now. This is what awareness feels like at first: confusing, frustrating, even painful. Because when you start to notice your patterns, you also start to feel the emotions you've been trying to outrun. You'll catch yourself mid-reaction wondering, wait, why am I so angry about this? Why do I suddenly feel unsafe? Why does this small thing hurt so much? And that's the moment something powerful begins. Because noticing means the pattern isn't in full control anymore. You're no longer fully lost inside it. Awareness doesn't instantly fix anything. It just gives you a choice: to pause, to breathe, to not reply immediately, to let the emotion pass before it writes another story for you. It's strange, isn't it? How something as simple as a pause can change everything. A pause is what separates reaction from response. And that small space, that single second of awareness, is where healing starts. But most people skip that space because it feels uncomfortable. The silence between the feeling and the response feels like drowning. You want to fix it, explain it, escape it. Yet, if you can just stay still for a bit, not judging, not rationalizing, you start to see what's actually happening inside you. Maybe you weren't angry, just scared. Maybe you weren't hurt by them, but by what it reminded you of. Maybe this isn't rejection, it's just your old story trying to play out again. And when you see that clearly, something softens. You stop fighting life like it's against you. You start to realize you're just being asked to understand yourself deeper. Part 4. When awareness changes behavior. Here's the thing about awareness. It doesn't make you perfect. It just makes you honest. Before, you might have snapped at someone, overthought a small silence, or tried to please everyone just to feel safe. Now you catch yourself. You still feel the urge, but you don't follow it automatically. That's how change actually begins. Not with control, but with consciousness. You start to notice what triggers you, what drains you, what feels real, and what feels like pretending. And little by little, your reactions begin to shift. Maybe you used to chase people who gave mixed signals. Now you pause, realizing you're drawn to the uncertainty because it mirrors something familiar, that old feeling of earning love. So you stop, not out of anger, but out of peace. Or maybe you always used to explain yourself too much, terrified someone would misunderstand you. Now you just let them think what they think, because you realize your worth doesn't depend on convincing anyone. This is what happens when you start observing your behavior instead of being consumed by it. You start living from awareness, not impulse. And that's powerful because awareness creates distance between you and the story running in your head. You start to see that emotions aren't commands. They're signals. Anger isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's a sign you've been ignoring your boundaries. Sadness isn't weakness. It's your body asking for rest. Jealousy doesn't make you bad. It just points to an unmet need for security. When you understand what your feelings are trying to say, they stop controlling you. You begin to respond instead of react. You listen instead of assume. You let silence exist instead of filling it out of fear. And the more you do this, the calmer life starts to feel, not because the world changed, but because you did. You stopped treating every situation as something to fix. You started seeing it as something to understand. People might even notice. They'll say things like, "You've changed." But what they really mean is, you're no longer fighting everything. It's not that you've stopped caring, you just learned the difference between reacting to life and flowing with it. You're still human, still emotional, still learning. You just know how to pause now. And that pause, that moment of clarity, is everything. Part 5. Awareness and relationships. When you start focusing on your behavior and thought patterns, your relationships begin to feel different. Not because others changed, but because you started noticing why you connect the way you do. You start realizing that a lot of what we call love isn't always love. Sometimes it's attachment, fear, or a habit disguised as connection. Maybe you used to chase people who were emotionally distant, You thought if you proved your worth, they'd finally stay. But now, you see that pattern clearly, how you were repeating an old wound, not building a new bond, or maybe you always went silent when conflict came up. Thinking peace meant avoiding tension. Now you understand that silence isn't peace when it comes from fear. Peace built on pretending doesn't last. You begin to see relationships less as a place to lose yourself, and more as a mirror that reflects what you still need to heal. When someone criticizes you, you pause before reacting. You ask yourself, are they right? Or is this just touching an old insecurity? When someone pulls away, instead of panicking, you breathe. You realize that their distance doesn't define your worth, it just defines where they are. This level of awareness softens you. You become more patient, not because you tolerate everything, but because you understand people act from their own wounds too. You start seeing others not as enemies in your story, but as humans carrying their own unseen weights. You stop demanding closure from every person who hurt you. You understand that some apologies will never come, and yet you can still choose peace, because closure isn't something you wait for. It's something you create when you stop letting the past explain who you are. Slowly, relationships become less about proving and more about understanding, less about being right and more about staying kind. You stop needing to control every outcome because you've learned that real connection doesn't come from control, it comes from presence. When you're aware, you love differently. You listen with more intention. You communicate with more calm. You forgive with boundaries instead of resentment. And sometimes you walk away not out of bitterness but clarity, because now you can tell the difference between fighting for something and fighting to feel something. That's what self-awareness does. It doesn't make love easier, but it makes it truer. The more you study your patterns, the more you realize awareness isn't about fixing yourself. It's about finally seeing yourself without judgment. You start noticing that behind every reaction is a story, behind every defense a fear. And once you understand that, you stop taking everything so personally, even your own pain. Because when you focus on your behavior and thoughts, you're not just analyzing, you're learning how to return home to yourself. And that's where growth quietly begins. So tonight, before you sleep, try observing your thoughts instead of arguing with them. Listen to the voice in your head, not to silence it, but to understand where it comes from. You might be surprised at how much peace exists in just noticing. If this kind of reflection speaks to you, subscribe for more stories like this, calm, honest, and deeply human. Because sometimes awareness doesn't come from doing more. It comes from finally sitting still and seeing what's been there all along.